At first glance, the Mary Russell seemed like any other merchant vessel carrying its crew across the Atlantic. But what unfolded during its return voyage from Barbados to Ireland would become one of the most chilling tales in maritime history. Madness, mutiny, and murder on the high seas.
Welcome to History Corner.
In the year 1828, the Mary Russell, a stout brig, set sail from the bustling port of Cove Island, bound for Barbados. Captain William Stewart, a seasoned mariner with a reputation for strict discipline, commanded the vessel. The crew, a mix of experienced sailors and young hands eager for adventure, anticipated a routine voyage across the Atlantic. Those on board when departing Ireland were 10 crew members and 1 passenger. The passenger was an 11-year-old boy named Thomas Hammond, the son of a close friend of Stewart's, whose health, they thought, would benefit from a trip to warmer climates. Of the 10 crewmen, 3 were mere boys: John Deves, 15 years old, Henry Richards, 12 years old, and Daniel Scully, 13 years old. The chief mate was William Smith. The second mate was a Swedish man named William Swanson. Carpenter John Kramer. John Howes, Francis Sullivan, and John Keating were seamen. Timothy Connell and James Morley were ostler's charge, with tending the cargo of mules on board. The trip to Barbados was uneventful and everything went as it should. However, on the return trip heading back to Ireland is when things went awry. Captain Stewart was an experienced seafarer at 53 years of age, known for being a good captain with a pleasant demeanour and for humanity and kindness. He was also known for not indulging in harsh disciplines like other captains. John Howes described Stewart as, "He was a kind, good master of a ship. When he did punish, he much preferred tying to flogging." Normally a man of steady resolve, Stewart started to exhibit signs of paranoia and erratic behaviour. It all started with a dream. While in Barbados, Captain Stewart was approached by a man, Captain James Rains. Captain Rains found himself stranded in Barbados after losing his command for drunkenness. Rains pleaded with Stewart for a passage back to Ireland. Initially, Stewart refused, but after seeing that Rains could get no other ship to accept him, Stewart changed his mind and allowed Rains to come aboard. At about 10 days out of Barbados, Captain Stewart reported to his chief mate, William Smith, that God had warned him in a dream that Rains was planning a mutiny and to take the vessel. Smith was, of course, surprised at the captain's certainty of a mutinous plot. He informed the captain that he knew of no such thing, and that it was a folly to mind dreams. They were false. On one occasion, Stewart accused Captain Rains of plotting against him simply because the man was found talking in hushed tones with another crew member in Irish. The captain didn't speak the language. The captain had become so paranoid about an impending mutiny that he ordered 2 of the crew that he trusted, Frank Sullivan and Timothy Connell, to sleep outside his berth. However, even with trusted bodyguards, the captain hardly slept and grew ever more pale and paranoid and even started losing weight. He even armed himself with a harpoon, an axe, and a crowbar. Stewart's behaviour became more and more peculiar. He became easily agitated at the slightest things. He ordered Smith to walk the deck armed. When Seaman Howes asked the captain to teach him how to take lunar observations, the captain was sure that it was for nefarious purpose. There was no one else on the ship that could navigate by the stars. The captain surmised that if Howes were to learn how, then mutiny would be a more tempting and possible prospect. A few days later, while John Keating was at the helm, he innocently asked Captain Stewart whether Captain Rains was a good navigator. This furthered Stewart's delusions about a mutiny. About halfway home, Stewart's paranoia rose to another level. He gathered everyone together and told them that because of Howes's interest in navigating at night and Keating's question about Captain Rains's navigational skills, he believed that they were making plans to harm him and take control of the ship. The men were understandably shocked by this and protested their innocence. They declared their loyalty to him. Captain Stewart was calmed and touched by this, but the calm didn't last long. He had made a decision to make himself invaluable. He called William Smith, Captain Rains, and the boy John Deves into his cabin. He then proceeded to order the log reel and sandglasses to be thrown out the window. He then threw out his box of charts and tore out pages of his logbook. Now only he could navigate. This did not ease Stuart's mind, however. He became distant and jumpy. He hardly ate. He hardly slept. Shortly after this, the Mary Russell encountered another ship called the Mary Harriet, bound for Liverpool. Captain Stuart boarded the Mary Harriet and talked with her captain. We don't know what they discussed, but undoubtedly Stuart vocalised his suspicions as the Mary Harriet's captain gave him a pair of pistols, which he hid from his crew. Saturday, 21st June, Captain Stuart summoned the boys John Deeves, 15, Daniel Scully, 13, and Henry Richards, 12, to the cabin. Captain Stuart talked again about intended mutiny. Then he pulled out a pistol and threatened the boys if they betrayed him. Stuart then demanded that they sign a paper confirming that there was a mutiny aboard. Terrified, they signed. He then dismissed them. Later, while Captain Rains, Swanson, Howes and Deeves were reducing sail, the rest of the men, Keating, Kramer, and the ostlers Timothy Connell and James Morley, were eating in the forecastle. As Timothy Connell was walking the deck after his meal, Captain Stuart summoned Connell down from the companionway. Connell had no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. He suddenly found a pistol was pointed at him by the captain, who demanded he confess to a mutiny. Stuart took his alarm as a guilt. Stuart ordered one of the boys to tie Connell up. Connell fearfully submitted to being tied up and then was moved out of sight. John Keating was summoned next, and the same procedure was enacted, and then he too was moved. This continued with each crew member until only Morley and Howes were still free. The 11-year-old Thomas Hammond watched everything from his daybed, cowering back against the wall behind him. Captain Stuart, who was so close to him and his family, had clearly gone mad. Captain Stuart decided to go after Howes next and sent one of the boys to call him. Howes knew that the rest of the crew were below, and he was hoping that the captain got over his notions and they were all friends again. When he got to the companionway, Howes called down to the captain and asked whether he was wanted below. That answer was yes. So Howes swung himself down and turned to see his captain at the foot of the stairs, his pistols cocked in his hands. Howes turned suddenly and started climbing up the staircase again, at which the captain tried to shoot him, but the pistols failed to fire. Howes raced back up the ladder. The captain chased Howes up on deck and shot at Howes, but missed him. Howes had reached the forecastle and jumped down the open hatchway, grabbing Morley and pushing him ahead of him. The captain stopped at the hatchway but retreated, not wanting to follow. Captain Stuart decided to switch tactics and try to talk them into surrendering. First he tried threats, then he tried an appeal to Howes' sympathy. That he had had no rest for several nights previous, telling them they would come to no harm if they submitted. Sadly, the ploy worked, and the soft-hearted Howes agreed to be tied, as did Morelli. Howes reasserted his innocence, but it fell on deaf ears. Stuart searched Howes and removed his knife. The entire crew, apart from the boys, had now all been tied up and were defenceless. Captain Stuart made sure all of the men were tied painfully tight, but it still didn't calm him. Stuart was afraid to put Howes with the other men because of his determined and outspoken character. Instead, he was moved into the half-deck, where he was alone. The night was filled with the moans and cries of the men who were bound far too tightly. Suffering swollen limbs, numb limbs from circulation being cut off. One man actually fainted from the pain from being tied to tight. The following day, Captain Stuart was still jittery and paranoid beyond reason. He was still panicked that his men would somehow get loose. So he decided he needed to rework all the bindings. He collected more rope and drove large staples and spikes into the deck of the cabin, one near the neck and one at the feet of each man. Passing the rope over the head of each crewman, he fastened the rope to the staple in the deck so no one could move without strangling himself. Then he used another rope to bind the crewmen's arms to their bodies and then tie up their legs. This had taken the captain and the boys several hours to complete. During the night, Howes had managed to loosen his bounds and was working toward freedom. After Captain Stuart and the three boys had finished with the crewmen in the cabin, they went looking for John Howes. The captain, armed with his pistols, had armed the three boys as well with a harpoon, the carpenter's axe. The captain removed the hatch of the half-deck and called out to Howes. As Howes turned to respond, the captain to see that his bonds were loose. Stewart ordered Howes to come out, to be better secured, threatening to kill him if he didn't comply. Howes refused, and once again denied any part in any mutiny. Stewart again threatened to kill Howes. Howes told him to go ahead. For a moment Stewart was halted by this, but it didn't last long. The captain pulled the trigger and missed. He fired a second shot and struck the outstretched hand of the defenceless Howes, lodging in his hand. Captain Stewart quickly recharged his pistols for another attack. He fired for the third time and grazed Howes's side. Howes fell on his back, believing himself to be mortally wounded. A fourth shot brought him back to consciousness, and he realized that the wound in his side was only minor. Howes decided to play dead, and it worked. The captain watched for a moment and told the boys he's dead. To make sure, he had one of the boys keep an eye on the hatchway and let him know if Howes moved. The boy declared Howes was dead. The captain and his young helpers were then surprised by the appearance of a sail on the western horizon. Captain Stewart was elated, thinking he would at last be able to hand over his traitorous crew and finally get some rest. Captain Stewart stood on the quarterdeck running up and down the deck, waving frantically at the other ship. The boat came within shouting distance, but inexplicably changed course and headed away from the Mary Russell. The captain was very distraught at this disappointment. The distraction of the passing ship gave John Howes a chance to inspect the extent of his injuries and discover they were not as bad as he had first thought. Unfortunately, his movements were noticed by one of the boys. The captain shot Howes again, this time in the thigh. Howes was absolutely terrified. He was still partially bound. While Stewart was reloading his pistols, Howes worked frantically to remove the rest of his bounds. He was successful and prepared for the fight that he knew was coming. Stewart ordered the boys to follow him down the hatchway. Howes grabbed a small case and used this as a shield as best he could. It worked, as Stewart shot at him again. Calling on the boys, still armed with the harpoon, Deeves, the Grains, Scully, and the axe, Richards, to follow, Captain Stewart led the way and jumped down the hatchway. Stewart then ordered the boys to attack Howes, to kill him. Howes pleaded with the boys not to murder an innocent man. This brought Deeves and Scully to a halt. Deeves began to plead with the captain to spare Howes. The boys were in tears. Enraged, the captain turned on the boys. He threatened to blow their brains out if they spared Howes. Howes took advantage of this to rush the lot of them. Howes grabbed hold of the captain and they grappled for control. Howes got the captain down on the deck and wrestled the harpoon away from Deeves. Howes paused, trying to decide how to proceed, knowing he couldn't kill Stewart, for then he would be charged with mutiny and murder after all. Howes's moment of hesitation allowed Richards to come to the captain's rescue. Richards repeatedly hit Howes on the head with his axe. Howes was forced to release his hold on the captain to avoid further blows from the axe. The captain fled with the boys following. Howes was surprised and relieved to find himself alone, even though he was severely wounded. He crawled away across the barrels of sugar that formed the cargo into the forepeak where he remained hidden. Captain Stewart went back to the cabin to recheck everyone's bindings. He then praised Richard for coming to his rescue. John Deeves and Daniel Scully went back up on deck and saw another ship approaching the Mary Russell. But once again the ship changed course and sailed away. Captain Stewart became desperate and frantic when a second ship had sailed away. He decided now that God was making a judgment against his crew and solidified his belief that they were guilty. So that Sunday afternoon, Captain William Stewart decided to put his crew to death. Stewart picked up a crowbar and called boys to follow him below. As he entered the cabin, he announced to his crew that, "The curse of God is upon you all." Timothy Hammond, having witnessed all the previous horrible events, pleaded with the captain not to hurt the men. The captain ignored the boy and then began attacking his men with the crowbar. One by one, the men were murdered with great brutality. Timothy continued to beg the captain to stop, to spare the men, all to no avail. After attacking each man with the crowbar, Stewart took the axe from the boy Richard and attacked each of his victims yet again, even though most of them were already dead. After this, he took the crowbar back again and went to the lazarette where Smith was still being kept. Smith, who could hear everything that had been happening, was terrified. Stewart slammed the crowbar through the air hole in the lazarette, grazing the side of Smith's head. Not satisfied, Stewart grabbed the harpoon next and stabbed the lazarette again and again with it. Smith had several cuts to his head, ears and eyes, but cried out when one of his eyes was hit. The captain then switched back to the axe again and tore up a portion of the cabin deck in order to get at his victim. He then continued stabbing at Smith with the harpoon. Smith had managed to roll onto his side, so most of Stewart's blows hit the hides that Smith had been lying on. This gave Stewart the impression that he was successful in his attack and that Smith was done. After finishing his horrible slaughter of his men, Stewart felt elated, excited, and triumphant. His appetite suddenly returned, and he ordered the boys to bring him some food and rum. Captain Stewart sat in the cabin, ignoring the blood and gore around him, ate and drank with pride in his work of the day, and promising the boys a great reward when they returned home. Smith, still very much alive, listened in shock. The four young boys looked on horrified at the captain's behaviour. As sundown approached, Stewart decided to secure the main cabin, not forgetting that Howes was still loose somewhere. Once he felt secure enough, he went to bed. Once Smith was sure he could not be heard, he worked himself free of his bonds. Smith was able to get to the cargo hold from the lazarette. He headed for the front of the hold, where he was reunited with Howes. They related the incredible events they had been a part of and witnessed. Captain Stewart did not sleep as well as he would have liked. He was still jumpy and paranoid. In the morning, the boys were shocked and alarmed when Captain Stewart called them over and ordered them to surrender their arms. They, of course, did so, too frightened not to. Next, Stewart ordered the boys to hold out their hands in front of them to be tied. Knowing full well what would happen if they complied, they cried and pleaded with the captain not to tie them up. For a moment, Stewart was touched and briefly became the man that the boys had known in the earlier stages of the voyage, a gentle, kind man. Swearing on a Bible that they would be perfectly safe. He did not, however, tie up Timothy Hammond. Captain Stewart proceeded to tie up the three boys. He had barely finished when they heard a voice hailing the ship. Captain Stewart stuck his head and shoulders out of the cabin window and hollered for assistance, claiming there had been a mutiny on board. Stewart ran up on deck to discover the ship was the Mary Stubbs, under the command of Captain Robert Callender. Stewart and Callender had become acquainted when they were in Barbados. As the captains greeted each other, Timothy Hammond went back down below and untied the boys. Stewart showed the Callender the bodies of his crew. Callender was startled and appalled by the bloody scene before him. Callender had never seen anything like this. Stewart was very pleased with himself, strutting around boasting about his handiwork. Stewart smiled at Callender, saying, "Was I not a valiant little fellow to kill so many men?" Callender was shocked to the core. He asked Stewart to explain to him what happened. Stewart told him his story and begged Callender to protect him and get him home safe. Stewart calmed down a bit when Callender agreed. Stewart also asked Callender to help him find Howes, and Callender did so. Howes pleaded with Callender to protect him from Captain Stewart and agreed to cooperate with Callender. Howes called Smith to come out as well. Both Howes and Smith were in a terrible state from their injuries. Smith's eye was hanging from its socket, gashed down his face, and missing an ear. Stewart was shocked at the sight of Smith, having believed he was dead. He then declared that Smith must be innocent, since he survived, and apologized for hurting him. Stewart refused to stay on the same boat as Howes. Callender removed Smith, Howes, Hammond to his ship and sent over 3 of his men to help Stewart sail the Mary Russell. As they approached the coast of Ireland, Callender could see Stewart was very agitated and asked him how he was. Stewart replied, "I'm not very well." Stewart then informed Callender that he was sure the men he had sent over were planning to take his ship and do him harm. Callender tried to reassure Stewart. When Callender turned his back on Stewart, Stewart shouted, "Lord help me," and proceeded to jump overboard. Stewart was picked up and brought back on board the ship. Callender reprimanded Stewart for being so reckless. Stewart changed his clothes, came back up on deck, and once again jumped overboard. He was picked up and brought back on board once again. This time, Callender ordered Stewart's legs tied to prevent him from jumping again. Callender's men expressed apprehension at staying on board with Stewart, so Callender removed Stewart from the Mary Russell and took him to his own ship, continuing on to port. Callender tried to get Stewart to rest, but Stewart was too agitated and panicked with Smith and Howes aboard. He went below and armed himself with a carving knife and fork. In an effort to calm Stewart, Callender sent Smith and Howes below deck and locked them up for their own safety. But Stewart was still afraid they would escape and kill him. As they approached the coast, they spotted 3 fishing sloops nearby. Captain Stewart, for the 3rd time, jumped overboard. He swam for the closest sloop, as was picked up. He persuaded the fishermen to change course and headed to the west. Callender did not pursue them, but resumed course for Cork Harbour. This town was thrown into a state of confusion and disarray when word of the Mary Russell with 7 persons, including passengers and crew, dead in their cabin, their bodies in a most mangled state, and 2 men most severely wounded. Captain Stewart was alive and in custody in Skibbereen, and had confessed to the killing of his crew. But he had also accused them of mutiny. On Thursday, the 26th of June, 1828, the coroner's inquest began. The court heard testimonies from the surviving crew, painting a chilling picture of Stewart's descent into madness. Despite his claims of thwarting a mutiny, the evidence was overwhelming. Stewart was found guilty, but insane. Due to his evident mental instability, he was not sentenced to life imprisonment, but was instead committed to an asylum until his death at the age of 98 on 21st August 1873. In the years that followed, descriptions of those that were permitted to visit Stewart in the asylum varied greatly. There were times when Stewart saw that his crew were innocent and that he committed the act under the influence of derangement. But then he would always bounce back to the belief that he had done right in killing his crew, for they were planning to kill him. There were long stretches of time where Stewart was calm, cooperative and pleasant, but then others when he was in a state of violent derangement. This story of the Mary Russell and Captain William Stewart is heartbreaking on so many levels. For the men murdered, for the 2 men who survived, for the boys, for the families of the victims, for Stewart and his mental condition, for Stewart's pregnant wife and children. Theirs was a very close-knit community. The town rallied for the families of the victims, and many donations were gathered to help them get through it all. Everyone felt the horror and grief of what had happened. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories from history. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you next time.